Welcome into the program, everyone. Great to be with you this morning. As always, it is Friday. The weekend is upon us. Really excited about that. Although there is no football this week, which unfortunately as an Auburn fan may actually be a good thing. I'll actually get to relax a little bit this weekend. May watch the SEC championship, but honestly, I probably won't. I hate both teams. I want both of them to lose. I would rather Alabama lose, but I don't know. Is it even this week? I think it's this week. Yeah, it should be this weekend. Anyway, so that aside, I do apologize for not being able to be with you yesterday. That was, of course, due to my truck stalling out and not wanting to cooperate with me, but luckily it wasn't a huge deal and we were able to get it fixed. So Clyde is back. My truck, Clyde, is back and on the road and running. So I'm grateful that that is able to take place because it was a real pain showing up to work late and having to re-crank him 4 or 5 times every time. So luckily now everything seems to be going well, and I do appreciate that. So lots of news going on right now, lots to talk about. One of the biggest stories of this week, and I've led, it feels like every day this week with news. It may, actually, I think I have led with this every day except for the one day we had John Kackelman in. The story that's going on in Birmingham and Hoover with the mall shooting. Now, there is some news, and I want to give a quick update on that because it is something that is so significant to our state. And just to give you a quick recap, it appears as though, and this is getting the new information and sort of applying it, that when the police officer shot the man E.J. Bradford, who had a gun, reportedly was brandishing it, but was not the shooter. So they were still looking for the person that was the shooter, since obviously if Bradford wasn't the shooter, then there had to be somebody that was. And they were still looking for him. They did pick up this guy. The U.S. Marshals found him in Atlanta. And so thankfully they were able to bring him in. He is in custody now, and he is the suspected shooter. They believe he's the one that did it. And so because of that, they think they've got their guy, which congratulations. By the way, the U.S. Marshals, I don't think get nearly enough credit, because I'm not saying that it's one of the very few federal government programs that I actually approve of and think they do a pretty good job. They do a lot with very little. They don't have a huge budget, and they perform a very necessary service, and they have a very dangerous job. And I appreciate the U.S. Marshal. I appreciate all of our first responders. I appreciate all of our law enforcement officials. But I did want to just give a little bit of praise there to the U.S. Marshals, who seem to be a very, very effective federal agency, which you almost can't say that about any federal agency. And that's why I think it's so profound that they are so good at their job. So the U.S. Marshals being able to pick up that guy, hopefully they've got their man, and the authorities both on the federal level who were able to get him because he crossed state lines, and also the officials right here in Hoover, Alabama. I hope they'll be able to sort all of this out. And speaking of that, the parents of Bradford's father, E.J. Bradford Sr., I don't think they actually called him E.J., but he has the same name. So he did an interview with, he and his wife, with the mayor and a couple of city council members the other day, and based on the reports that I saw, it was not one of contention. That, of course, there are strong emotions there because that's a couple that just lost their child, and even if their child happened to be a bad guy, and again, we don't know whether he was or not, but even if he was, I mean, you've got to feel for the parents. And again, we'll see what all happened with that and what happens going forward. But either way, you feel for them, and hopefully they will do okay. I've been praying for them recently. I would encourage you to do the same. And one request that they made is for the authorities to release the videotape, which is a perfectly reasonable request. And I speculated, I didn't know why it has taken them so long. We're now over a week after the event happened, because of course it happened on Thursday night during the Black Friday sales at the Galleria. I don't know why they're hanging on to that information. I really don't, because I guessed the other day, you may remember when we were talking about it, I speculated that perhaps the reason they did not release the footage is because it was an ongoing investigation. They still had a gunman that was at large. They didn't want to release information that made the guy think that he was onto them or something like that. And so maybe that was the motivation. I don't know. But if that was the case, that obviously is no longer true because the marshals have already picked this guy up and he's in custody. So now what really happens is it becomes a question of, what are they going to do with the footage? Are they going to release it? Hoover authorities have given a deadline. They say that if the ALEA, which is the head law enforcement agency here in the state of Alabama, if ALEA does not release the information by Monday, then the city of Hoover says they're going to release it, which it's within their right to do so. And honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The request made by the parents, perfectly reasonable, I thought. And frankly, I want to see it. I want to see what's going on, and I wonder why they have hung on to it this long if it were not for a reason of that nature. Now, it's possible, I don't know, that the reason that the law enforcement officials have not released it is what people on the other side of this debate have been speculating, which is it makes the police officer look bad and they're trying to protect the police officer, which I don't buy into that theory, just because if that were the case, then that's a really stupid move. Because if that's really what happened, if it shows that the police officer was just trigger happy and he just shot this guy because he happened to have a firearm on him, wasn't menacing it, wasn't being menacing, wasn't showing the gun about and waving it at people and that kind of thing, and the cop just drops him for no reason, well, then that's very bad. But hanging on to the videotape longer just lets resentment build up. And so I doubt that the reason that they're doing it is because it makes the police officer look bad. But at this point, I can't figure out what it is, because they've already got the guy. I don't know why they haven't released it yet. Maybe they will. Who knows? They might be releasing it right now during this broadcast. But we will see in the coming days whether or not that is actually going to take place. And I really do hope that we have some information on that. Hopefully we'll be able to bring that to you Monday if they release it. And we'll go through the footage and look at the tape, because that will settle a lot of this disagreement. And I don't know if it's going to do anything to get rid of the upheaval, because it seems like a lot of the people that are protesting have kind of already made their minds up regardless of what the videotape would show. But for the vast majority of people that are out here just wanting to know the truth, it's definitely not an unreasonable request, and I am hoping that that happens before too long. The Birmingham mayor, Randall Woodfin, he actually the other day was asking the protesters, the people out there protesting in the streets, to help with law enforcement. This can be taken a multitude of ways, and the popular theories seem to be that he was saying, as everyday citizens, we have the ability to stop crime because we can see something and report people, or when we see something that has gone awry, we can do something about it ourselves and step in and act as first responders. Or when we just go out and live our lives, we're good people. We act as examples for those who we influence, employees to employers and vice versa, parents and children. And so by being better people, we can combat crime by being lawful ourselves. That is a possible interpretation of what he is saying. There is another interpretation of what Mayor Randall Woodfin was saying, where he's basically telling the protesters that they need to be the law enforcement and they need to go out there and they need to enforce laws themselves. If that's the case, that's very bad. If that's the case, then you have anarchy and you have people going around and taking the law into their own hands. Now, I got no problem with a citizen acting as a first responder. In other words, he sees a bad situation, he steps up and does the best that he can to make sure everybody's safe. But that's very different than proactively going after people. And I wish the mayor had been a little bit more clear in his meeting, because if he's talking about the first way this can be taken, I got no problem with that. In fact, I think the Birmingham mayor is spot on in saying that. If he means the second one, that's a problem, because we don't need paramilitary groups roaming around the streets and acting as enforcers. There's a reason that we give the government a monopoly on proactive violence. There's a reason that we're the ones that allow them to be proactive in their pursuit of lawbreakers. And we don't need private citizens going around and taking it upon themselves to do that. I mean, I love Batman as much as the next guy, but let's be honest. If Batman were living in the real world, and there's just a myriad of problems that would be caused by that. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. Other news going on today is that there's a lot of upheaval in the world over trade. And what's funny about this is that Trump is in the center of all of it, which isn't surprising for those of us who have been paying attention. I mean, the guy, his position on trade has changed about 15 times. He seems to be, and this is my thought, he seems to be ideologically of the belief that tariffs are good and trade wars are good. And I believe the exact opposite. I think that tariffs are economically horrible, and virtually every economist worth his salt, whether he's on the left or the right, agrees. But the thing about this, and I don't want to go into a lecture on that because I've done that so many times on this program that, you're probably sick of it at this point. But just looking at what happened specifically with this trade deal, President Trump was on the TV this morning with Prime Minister Trudeau and the President of Mexico discussing the fact that he has replaced NAFTA. And one of the things that President Trump has talked about with NAFTA is that it's outdated, it's an old deal, it's a bad deal, and we're getting screwed with it, which is really not true. Because if you're looking at the economic growth after NAFTA, it was accelerated even faster. Now, I'm not saying that NAFTA alone was the reason for that. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into an economy. But if you're looking specifically at trade and even the industries that NAFTA affected, especially those where it actually brought trade barriers down, we were seeing an uptick in those businesses. And so President Trump has this idea that trade is a zero-sum game, that if one country is benefiting from trade, the other country must be losing, which is not true. That's not how things work in a free market. For example, when you go down to your local grocery store and you buy a gallon of milk, that doesn't mean that anybody got screwed, because you wanted the milk more than you wanted the money that was in your pocket. The grocery store wanted the money in your pocket more than they wanted the milk, because they've got milk and you've got money. So you both walk away from that trade feeling like you won. You both walk away from that trade feeling as though you got exactly what you wanted. Because if you thought that the price was unfair, you wouldn't get it. Now, you may want a cheaper price, and that's a different matter entirely. But the point is, if you believe that if they were charging $10 for milk and you're like, well, that's crazy, I'm not paying $10 for milk, and you walk away with the $10 in your pocket, that means that you valued the $10 more than the milk. And that works on the personal level, but it works the same on the macro level. The reason that trade works and the reason that trade spurs on an economy for a number of different reasons, and we won't get into competitive advantage and absolute advantage and all the specifics of it, but suffice it to say that because these are mutually beneficial relationships, that's the reason that we engage in them in the first place. However, when Trump said that NAFTA is dated, he's not wrong on that. It's kind of an older deal. And that doesn't mean that the deal is bad, which is kind of the way he's portraying it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the deal is bad, but it also doesn't mean that it couldn't use an update. And this new trade deal that Trump has put forward has changed very little. He changed the name of it because Trump likes naming things. The guy's a marketer. He's a brander. That's who he is. That's what he does. And that's fine. That's where his talent is. But nonetheless, him changing the name didn't change very much of what actually was in NAFTA to begin with. And so this new deal has a few minute tweaks, but overall, it's pretty much just NAFTA 2.0. And I'm sure the president would scoff at that because he's convinced that his deal is so much better than anything any other person could have ever come up with. But it's really not that much different than NAFTA. And here's the irony in all of that. The trade barriers that were brought down or weakened, as Trump put it in the speech this morning, you know who the new deal benefits more than anybody else? Canada. Actually, Canada came out the biggest winner on this, which is not a problem for me. I don't have a problem with Canada bringing down their tariffs and increasing their market. That's a good thing, because that means, since we're using milk here, the reason that I did is because dairy was one of the chief areas of concern. Canada had something ridiculous, I think it was like a 230% tax, a 230% tariff on American milk. Well, who was getting, the raw end of that deal? It was hurting our dairy farmers just a little bit, because it meant that that was a market that they couldn't really be competitive in. But to be honest, it wasn't hurting them all that much. The real person that it was hurting was the Canadian that's paying $6 for a gallon of milk, because their dairy farmers no longer have to be competitive and can charge more because they can't be undersold when there's another company in a different country selling the same product or a better product for less money. And so because of that, they can raise their prices and not have to worry about the competition, which means that overall, what eventually happens with tariffs is people are paying more to that particular industry than the raw value of what it's actually worth. And so because of that, the ones that were getting hurt most by that were Canadians. And so Canada actually walked away from that deal with the best out of all of us. And since I don't believe that trade is a zero-sum game, I believe that everybody can win. I don't have a problem with that. It's a good deal for America too. And it's a good deal for Mexico. I don't have a problem with the new deal really at all. And there were some updates that were made that I think were good. But the idea that this is a radically better deal than NAFTA is simply not true. It is better, but it's incrementally better. It's better by a little bit, not by much. But nonetheless, still a good deal. I haven't seen anything in the deal yet that gives me pause. And I do agree with the sentiment of Prime Minister Trudeau, which honestly sounds really weird to even hear myself say that, because goodness knows Trudeau is way out there on the left. But one thing that Trudeau said that I actually did agree with is that we should be striving for free trade, which is an odd idea for a socialist to actually come out and endorse, but nonetheless, that's what he's saying. So he said he made mention of that this morning, and if that is the goal of Canada and Trump, and this is how I would handle it if I were president, I'd take him up on that offer and said, all right, Trudeau, you want free trade? I'm good with that. Why don't we lower all our trade barriers? You go to zero tariffs, I go to zero tariffs, everybody wins. That would have been how I responded to that. I would have called him on his bluff. And I hope it's not a bluff. I hope he really is committed to that, but the behavior that I have seen of him recently does not lean me more towards that camp. And don't forget, you can always tweet me at Tactics Radio. By the way, we have a new segment that's coming up. We're kind of getting everything ready to where we answer caller emails that you can send in actually before the show if you want to do so. And you can email me at any time, tacticsradio@gmail.com. That would be the address. And if you do, you're going to really love this, but we'll be doing an email sort of question and answer, and you can ask anything about the show, anything about politics in general. So it'll be more of an open forum kind of thing. So if you want to do that, may have your email read on the show, email me at tacticsradio@gmail.com. So what we've got here are several, because the media fallout has been just so tremendous when it comes to the migrant caravan, and there's new news now that a lot of them are actually planning on heading home. A lot of them are planning on actually being self-deported back to Honduras from Mexico. And the reason for that is because they thought that they were basically just going to stroll right into America and that it wasn't going to be a problem, that they'll just waltz right through. And there's a combination of reasons why they might believe that. First of all, the policies of the previous administration, basically that is what happened, is that you ran across the border and they saw you, they went and arrested you, kept you in a holding facility for about 20 days. In 20 days, the court would say, nope, you've got to release them while they're awaiting their asylum hearings. And so they would release them and then you never hear from them again. And so the catch and release policy it was a sloppy way to get open borders, but basically it was open borders in a lot of ways. Now, the Obama administration, I do want to give them credit. They did deport quite a few people. But when it came to people that were trying to come through, they did the catch and release, and that did result in an awful lot of problems when it came to that. And we see that actually a lot in the changing demographics in the border states there. But nonetheless, that was one of the issues that was probably contributing to this myth. And another one is, if you're looking at the groups, and we're going to talk about some of the groups that are running this whole thing, that organized the migrant caravan in just a second, they probably were feeding them a lot of that because they have a political agenda themselves. And you look at especially CNN and the Washington Post, they have been just garbage on this. I mean, you look at their coverage of how they handled the border rush Sunday, where migrants were trying to force their way across and climb fences and slip through the fence, all these other things. And I mean, you can just read the headlines and tell the political bend of those. It was basically women and children get tear gassed at the border and all this other stuff, specifically trying to make the Border Patrol, who were just doing their jobs, trying to keep people from invading our country. That's all they were doing, and they were trying to keep that from happening, and they still tried to paint them as though they were the bad guys. And unfortunately, the Washington Post and CNN especially, I mean, the mainstream media as a whole have been bad on it, but those two especially have been particularly bad in trying to advocate for open borders. And remember, there was this huge back and forth in the media over this past election, because originally what they said was, oh, Donald Trump and conservatives, they're only talking about the border because they're trying to fearmonger. They're trying to do this because of the election. There's nothing to worry about. This isn't a big deal. Caravans like this happen all the time. By the way, that's not true. There have been caravans in the past, but they are a relatively rare event. And they were playing it down as though it wasn't something to worry about. They were saying it's not really a big deal. And then when the election happened, and people were covering the election, the fallout, giving opinion on what the election meant, they said, see, Trump and the conservatives, they're not talking about the border anymore. Well, we weren't, because A, there was not a lot of new news on the migrant caravan after they crossed the border from South America to Mexico. And another thing, that they were just like every other news outlet, they were covering the election. It wasn't as though nobody cared about the migrant caravan, but there was a bigger, more pressing news story right there in the moment. And then, just a few days after that, when conservatives started picking up this story again, when we started getting some new information on it and started covering it on talk radio and Fox News and other conservative outlets, then they said, well, see, it's just because they're racist. So again, their assumption is that you are a bad guy regardless of how you react to it. Because originally they said, well, it's about the election, and then when the election was over, they said, see, now the election's over, they're not talking about it, they didn't really care about it, they didn't really think it was a big deal, and then they start talking about it, and we start talking about it again because more news starts trickling in, and all of a sudden it's because we're racist and bigoted and homophobic. I don't know how homophobia rolls into there, but rest assured they'll label you that way. And so all of the labels just come out, and all the slings and arrows come out regardless of what stance you take on it and how much you talked about it. And a perfect example of this, just an illustration of how garbage the media, especially CNN and WAPO, have been on this particular issue, I think comes on the heels of, you remember the exchange that Jim Acosta actually got thrown out for? Do you remember what happened and what that was over? When Jim Acosta got his press credentials pulled, the reason that he did, or the event that led to the reason that he did, I should say, that whole exchange is because he got up and decided he was going to grandstand and argue with the president. Which, here's the thing. If you want to argue with somebody, that's fine. Don't be a journalist. Be an opinion guy like me. I'm a political commentator kind of guy. That's what the show is. That's why you tune in, because I'm not a journalist. I'm not objective. I have opinions about things, and I tell you about that. And if Jim Acosta wants to do that, that's fine. He should be more in line with Don Lemon or Chris Cuomo. There are places at CNN for people like that. But Jim Acosta decided that he was going to be a journalist and an activist all at the same time and stand there and argue with the president. And that's what led to that testy exchange and resulted in his press pass being pulled. But here's the funny thing about that. That argument was over the migrant caravan. It was over the border, specifically in how the president related to it during the time close to the election. And I want you to listen very carefully to what Jim Acosta is saying, because all the things that Jim Acosta is saying are not a thing to be worried about and are not going to happen. They all happen, and I've overlaid this video with some of the events that he's saying would never happen, except they actually do happen in this clip. Watch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in the midterms.
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election to try to keep...
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process. And I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign...
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
Right. But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true. But they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, it happened a few days ago. And
they're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN. All right. And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may.
All right, so that's the exchange, you remember, that resulted in all this hoopla between Jim Acosta and Donald Trump. Look, I am the first person that rushes to point out when Trump is wrong. Y'all know this. I've never been somebody that was a Trump sycophant. I've never been that guy that just whatever the president says is right. He makes mistakes a lot. You've seen earlier in this particular episode that he and I have some pretty deep-seated disagreements on things like trade. But I mean, you look at the video, I'm sorry, he's been right on literally everything when it came to this caravan. Every prediction that Trump has made, even if he didn't have facts to back it up at the time, wound up coming true. All of them. And Trump, he's very inaccurate in his speech. He tends to get things wrong. He tends to not word things eloquently. And because sometimes he's not all that precise, that gets him in trouble. But I'm sorry, you look at the video, you look at the footage that we've seen of migrants in this caravan doing, he predicted absolutely everything that was going to happen here. Right now, conservatives are batting 1,000, at least on this one story. And they have gotten every single prediction right. Another thing to be considered is that they reported just the other day that about a third of the people in the migrant caravan are sick because of conditions that they've had to deal with. And there have been outbreaks of tuberculosis and chickenpox. And, are these huge deals? I would say that they're at least something to be concerned about, especially if they're trying to come into the country. And I would say that this is a minor issue compared to the fact that they're breaking laws and that there's a high risk of importing people that have criminal records, that kind of thing, because we found out just recently that there are over 600. And now that the caravan is down to only about 6,600, that's 10% of the people coming in have criminal records. So when they're fleeing political persecution, a lot of that is because they broke the law. Maybe there were some laws that were unjust, some of them weren't, but if you're looking at the crimes that some of these people have been accused of, for example, some of them are like attempted murder, being involved in a gang, and we have confirmed through multiple sources through the Department of Homeland Security and individual journalists, because you'll remember Trump in a tweet, and caught a lot of flack for it, said that in this migrant caravan, there are members of the MS-13 gang, and there are people from the Middle East trying to slip into the border through Mexico. Well, we found out both of those things happen to be true. Both of those things were right. Again, Trump has been right on every single thing he predicted in this particular story. And so we've got sickness, disease, we've got people breaking the law. We have people like you saw in that clip where he's arguing with Jim Acosta, trying to invade the country, trying to force their way through. They're not hundreds of miles away. They're here now. And maybe they were a long ways away when Jim Acosta was having that conversation, but he's like, there's nothing to worry about. They're a long ways away. It's not like they're going to show up here. They're not here. Well, yeah, they are. They're here, and they are climbing fences, which Jim Acosta said, no, not going to happen. That's exactly what happened. And so this is part of the reason that people get so frustrated with the media, is because the media will deny, and then say, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Just move along, go on with your lives. Then it actually happens, even though the media were the ones that told you that you shouldn't worry about it. And they say, oh, well, yeah, we were wrong, but still, you shouldn't worry about it. And they won't even actually admit that they were wrong. They just kind of move on and move past that and act as though they were right the whole time. And so this idea, they're asking you to deny your own eyes. They're asking you to deny the things that you are actually seeing happen. And that is what is truly tragic about this whole thing. And the reason that conservatives have such a problem with the media that long predates Trump. They act as though conservatives didn't dislike the media until Trump came along and told us to dislike the media. Guys, conservatives have disliked the media for decades. I'm 29 years old, and I cannot remember a time where conservatives were not convinced that the media was well in the pocket of liberals. I don't remember that time. There are older people that do, but I don't remember it. And I've been around for almost 3 decades now. So let's take a look at some of this other stuff, because PragerU's Amy Horowitz was on the border. He decided, I don't know what's going on. I want to get a better look into what this is doing. And so he actually goes down to the border, and in a minute that's about 7 minutes long, it tells you more about the border than watching the past 3 weeks of cable news has told you. I mean, Amy Horowitz does some amazing work. Last I heard, he's in Bangladesh or something like that doing some investigative work. And I got to tell you, just a quick promo before we get into the actual clip. PragerU is a great institution. They put together short, easily digestible clips about conservatism, about history. If you want to donate to a good cause, if you want to donate to a conservative cause, that is a great choice, because their goal is to educate younger people and actually give them the facts, give them statistics, give them tools to use in defending their beliefs and understanding the world better. So I highly, highly recommend that if you have some money, you want to give it to a conservative cause, you want to give it to somebody that's going to help educate the younger generation on these issues, PragerU is a great way to go with that. And Amy Horowitz showing you exactly why that is the case in this clip, where he goes down to the border and does some investigation of his own. Watch.
Despite the framing of the Caravan as being full of women and children, the reality on the ground is quite different. Approximately 90 to 95% of the migrants were male. The major narrative being pushed by the press has been that the migrants are leaving Honduras because they are escaping extreme violence and that their lives are under constant threat, setting up the strategy that they would be able to enter the U.S. by asking for asylum. So I started by asking them a simple question. Why are you coming to America?
Bueno, voy buscando una mejor vida económica.
Venir a trabajar aquí a Estados Unidos. A ver si podemos trabajar allá porque en Honduras no hay trabajo. Pues buscando una vida mejor porque en Honduras no hay trabajo. Por trabajos.
Y vengo a trabajar porque quiero ir a terminar mis estudios allá.
Terminar estudios en mi caso.
Come on, don't you just want to meet Caitlyn Jenner?
Ah, ya más mujer.
Right, so pretty sure Caitlyn Jenner doesn't qualify you for asylum status, but nonetheless, you look at what was talked about in that particular video. He's saying that was 90 to 95% young men. He's saying these are being billed as people that are asylum seekers that are fleeing political persecution or something of that nature, and they're all pregnant women and children. And he's looking through the crowd. He's like, nah, this is at least 90, maybe 95% young men. And you look at the people that he interviewed, that was the case. But I know what you may be thinking here. PragerU is they clearly have a political agenda. They're on the conservative side. Dennis Prager is somebody that is a social conservative. And so probably what's happening here is Amy Horowitz, because he does work for Prager University, he's going there and he's kind of skewing it in a certain way to make it look as though it's not really a bunch of pregnant women and children and families. He's really just trying to trick you into thinking that it's a bunch of young men. Well, you might be able to believe that if it were not for this clip that comes via not Prager University, not Breitbart, not The Blaze, not Fox News, MSNBC. Take a look.
Because some people look at these images and they listen to the president who says it's not women and children, it's stone cold criminals. So my first question is, you're in that tent camp. Besides that family, give us the profile of who is there mostly and what are they looking for? Because it seems as though, to your point, they don't actually have the necessary information so they know how to cross the border. There could be people yesterday who were running because they thought it was their only chance.
Right. And it's very difficult because this has become such a polarizing issue. If we kind of take a walk, you'll be able to see for yourself. Again, this is the inner sanctum of the shelter. So you're going to see a lot of families here, a lot of women and children. But the truth is the majority of the people that are part of this caravan, especially outside, if we can make our way all the way over there, we'll show you the majority of them are men. So when this becomes a polarized political the United States, you have people on one side that point and say there are women and children here, and that is true. And then there are others who point and say these are men that are trying to cross the border, and that's true too. From what we've seen, the majority are actually men, and some of these men have not articulated that need for asylum. Instead, they have talked about, going to the United States for a better life and to find work.
Well, there you have it right there. That guy, MSNBC reporter, he just parroted his findings, which are exactly the same as Amy Horowitz. He says, actually, I'm looking through the crowd here, and it's mostly men, and they're not talking about asylum. They're not talking about fleeing some kind of persecution. What they're talking about is they want to find work. They want a better life. They want to build a better life for themselves. That in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it also doesn't make you an asylum seeker. There's nothing wrong with wanting a job. There's nothing wrong with wanting to come to the land of opportunity and go by that process and actually get a job here and build some wealth and build it and give it to your family. There's nothing wrong for that. In fact, I applaud that, but it also doesn't give you the right to seek asylum. If you want to come through the legal way. Apply to actually be accepted into the United States to come to this country and then build a better life for yourself. But these guys are saying, no, we just want to find work. We want to find a better job. And our plan to do so is apparently, based on what we were seeing, to rush the border and try to force their way through that way. And so it's just they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, which is so sad. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes and say, no, these are just a bunch of, and they're playing on your emotions, saying these are just a bunch of women and children and families. And like the reporter was saying there, those people are there. That's true. But the vast majority are just young men that want a better job. And while that may be fine in and of itself, it is not in and of itself a qualification for asylum. In fact, just to give you a better idea about this, these are the qualifications, and I'm getting this directly from the government's website. These are the qualifications for asylum. Every year, people come to the United States seeking protection because they have suffered persecution or fear that they will be persecuted due to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Those are the 5 things that can qualify you for asylum. Work is not listed amongst them. It's fine that you want to come to a different country and work, but you have to do so through the legal process. Seeking asylum is specifically for those that are under threat of violence, and they have what the legal standard refers to as a reasonable fear. So if you have a reasonable fear that you're going to be attacked or persecuted in your own country, then yeah, come to America, seek asylum. We want to be able to help you. That's a good thing that America does. But we need to look at it as a gift. We need to look at it as generosity because that's what it is. America is under no obligation to take those people. It is something that is offered to them through charity and generosity. But the converse of that is there are people that are trying to abuse the system and they're trying to come in for work. But when they are asked the question, presumably, at the border, well, they'll say, well, I'm seeking asylum. Well, you can't seek asylum and say that the reason for that is work. You just read the qualifications right there. Those are clearly not asylum seekers, and the vast majority of the people in the caravan are not asylum seekers. No matter how many times the left tells you that, you just heard it from their very own mouths. They're not fleeing crime and violence and all this other stuff. They're just looking for a job for themselves, which again, I don't have a problem with somebody doing that, but you need to do it the legal way. And that's the issue that we're running into. I've got no problem with immigration. I have a problem with illegal immigration. It's a fine but important distinction. So let's look about this. Let's ask ourselves the question. Clearly, we saw by that video, moving a group of people that large takes a lot of resources, lots of food, lots of water, lots of medical care. So how are they getting that? Where is that coming from? Well, Amy Horowitz answers that question as well.
There's a massive logistical effort underway, akin to moving an army, and is clearly costing someone millions of dollars for the transportation, food, water, medicine, and services that are being provided for the members of the caravan. It's a supply chain that is being delivered by an army of trucks, which are all necessary to keep this enormous group moving forward. This is a truck actually carrying generic Gatorade.
It's got electrolytes.
The Mexican government also seems to be sending police to escort the dozens of buses and trucks that are ferrying the migrants and supplies along the route to the next destination. Ever present among the thousands of migrants are workers of Pueblos Sin Fronteras, clad in black t-shirts and colored vests. Pueblos Sin Fronteras means people without borders. They're the ones that seem to be most involved in organizing and mobilizing this caravan. The organization, as the name implies, is looking to create a world without borders, which seems to be one of the reasons why they organized this caravan in the first place, to flout American sovereignty. Many of the Frontera workers have a very interesting perspective on the United States, particularly since they're trying to move all these migrants into our country.
Estados Unidos para mí no es nada, ya pues, porque Estados Unidos ya hay mucho racismo para nosotros de Honduras.
This is one of the organizers on the ground with Pueblos Sin Fronteras, and she explains how they help the migrants game the U.S. immigration system.
We're working on collaborating with a lot of organizations to do large-scale legal orientation so people understand their options for refugee and humanitarian protection here in Mexico, as well as their rights to request asylum in the States and provide mass presentations about Know Your Rights. They call them Know Your Rights presentations, like to bring people together and make sure they understand that they can organize and they can fight for their rights.
Are you helping them on how to speak to reporters? And
training folks on how to deal with the press. So like I was telling Fox News here, it's like asking really scary questions.
They made a kind of unsafe environment?
Yeah, of course.
How many of you are there? How many from the organization? From
hundreds.
All right, so there you have it. The Pablo Cifonteres, or however you say it, you can tell that I'm extremely white and don't know any Spanish. Almost flunked Spanish class. But nonetheless, that's the group that is organizing this whole thing. They're putting it together. They're the ones that are helping these people along. And you're also seeing that the Mexican government is offering their assistance, or at least was back then when this was taken a couple weeks ago. They were helping escort buses and escort the migration up north, which I was saying. Originally, Mexico's plan, the reason they let them through the border, the reason that all this took place, is because Mexico was thinking, we'll just let them pass them along to America, and then they're America's problem, and we don't have to deal with them anymore. That was the original plan. Now, obviously, that plan didn't go as according to their original intentions, but the point is that was the original plan. Mexico had no intention of taking care of these people, and so they didn't really have a problem with them, and they were trying to get them to the American border as quickly as possible, giving them police escorts to do so. And so you have this collaboration between this activist group, Pueblos Sin Fronteras. And just so you understand exactly what's going on with all these trucks and buses and food and medical supplies and medical care, if you want to find out who they are, all you do is follow the money. So this is the same group that organized the April Caravan. You know that caravan that happened back in April? The one, it was smaller, but it did take place and it caused a stir, and we kind of had the same conversation about asylum status and refugees and all that other stuff. When they got to the border down here, that was a test run. The same group that organized that one organized this one. It's the same people. And just to give you a better idea of who they are, BuzzFeed and the New York Times have both reported, hardly conservative outlets, both BuzzFeed and the New York Times have now reported that the guy running this project was a guy named Alex Mincing. They're the ones that are reporting that he's the project organizer for this whole thing. He's overseeing Pueblos Sin Fronteras and their project on this. He also works for a group known as CARA. And that's what his actual job is. So CARA is funded largely by two organizations, the American Immigration Council and the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. These are both wildly pro-amnesty groups. They're groups that have called for basically the abolition of borders entirely, and for us to all just be one world government. I mean, some of their ideas are really, really radical. But if you're looking at that, let's see, both pro-amnesty groups, and an organization like this obviously has to have a lot of funding to be able to put all this together, to be able to put together all these trucks and this supply chain. Like Amy Horowitz said, it's basically like an army. When you have an army, you have to have a supply chain, you have to have cooks, you have to have medical supplies, you have to have people running the food back and forth, and it is kind of like moving an army. Well, obviously that money is coming from somewhere. Where's it coming from? Well, guess what? One of the biggest donators to these two groups, the American Immigration Council and the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, is George Soros. Now, you'll remember, and Brother AJ actually talked to me about this weeks ago, and he said that George Soros was the one funding, and I said, well, there's no evidence for that yet. Believe me, it wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I'm pretty certain that he is funding it at least in some way, but I can't prove that yet. Well, guess what? Now we can prove it. Now that we know that that's the group that's organizing it, now we absolutely can prove it. Because if you go back, those two organizations that fund this whole thing, they've both gotten very big checks from George Soros. George Soros was given about $970,000 to the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, so just barely under $1 million. And he also gave the American Immigration Council $350,000 with 2 separate checks. Which means that, yes, the migrant caravan is being funded by George Soros. It took us a while to finally find it, but yes, Soros money is going directly to them through one of his networks. 2 of his networks, actually. 2 of the ones that he donates to. So, yes, absolutely. Again, conservatives have gotten every single thing about this caravan that they have predicted so far right, including who's funding it. So, that being said, conservatives have just been batting 1,000 on this thing the whole thing. Now, I could pretend that I'm shocked here, but I'm really not. You knew it, I knew it, we all knew that eventually this money trail was going to lead back to George Soros. It already led back to Beto O'Rourke at one point, and now it's leading back to George Soros too. So once again, conservatives have been right on every single aspect of this particular issue. Let's go ahead and look at one last clip. We've got one last clip here. Amy Horowitz on the trail with the caravan.
America also has very generous benefits for people who live in America. Is that something you want to take advantage of as well?
Así es. Sí, claro que sí, para poder salir adelante por medio de esos beneficios.
Pues bueno, me lo traje a él y al niño, pero el niño me ha dado problema porque ha desmayado.
Do you think that your son can have better treatment in the United States as opposed to Honduras?
Pues esa es la confianza que tenemos en Dios.
There are probably several billion people in the world who are seeking a better life. Do these migrants think that all of them should be allowed to enter the U.S.? Should America let in anybody who wants to come in?
Es la idea y es lo que nosotros queremos.
Porque todos venimos con necesidad. Pues la verdad sí.
Pues la verdad que sí.
Pues claro que sí, porque va mucha gente necesitada y va huyendo por los motivos de nuestro país.
Well, there you have it, straight out of the horse's mouth. They believe that anybody that shows up to the United States should just be taken, no questions asked. And it's because they have lots of needs. Well, our people have needs. Everybody in the world has needs. And America's a rich country. There are other countries that are poor, but that doesn't mean it's our responsibility to take every poor person from every other country. Because if that were to take place, America would become their country. You cannot import massive quantities of poor people into a rich country without that country also becoming poor. You cannot move large swaths of people at one time to a new place and expect that place to not start resembling the old place at least to some degree. It is much easier to pull people down than it is to pick them up. And if you don't believe me, if you think this is just me being harsh, look at Europe. Europe in the past 10 years has really gone downhill because they kept importing massive quantities without regulating, without vetting different people from the Middle East. And you not only had regular migrants that were coming over there and seeking asylum, but you also had asylum seekers from the Syrian civil war, and they were importing large populations of people that didn't share their culture, didn't speak the language, didn't understand their economy, and didn't understand how their job market worked and all of that other stuff. And what's happening now? You've got some countries like Switzerland, which had one of the lowest crime rates on earth, has now become the rape capital of Europe. I mean, they've imported crime, they've imported disease. In Germany's case, Germany actually evicted its own citizens in certain apartment complexes to give those homes and to pay for them with the citizens' tax dollars for other refugees. And when you do that, when you inject a large portion of a foreign population into your population all at one time, then it is going to make wherever those people came from, for better or worse, it is going to make your country look more like their country. It's impossible to have it any other way. And so that's the problem that we're running into. America, yes, we have a lot, and we are grateful for that, but we also worked really hard for it. And it is not fair for other people to demand handouts from us just because they have needs. Now, if we give them things, and we do. I mean, we do. We give all kinds of money in foreign aid. We let in a lot of immigrants, a lot of asylum seekers every single year. And so the idea that we're not doing anything is not true either. But even that is generosity. It's something that is given and given freely. We have no obligation or responsibility to solve the world's problems. That is not incumbent upon our government or our people to do so. And so it is not a responsibility that we bear. But I want to go back to, for just a second, these people are basically coming here to reap the benefits of your tax dollars. And that's what I find so distasteful about this. They act as though they are entitled to things that other people have just because you live in a rich country and they don't. And that is not the way that this is supposed to work. But the Department of Homeland Security, as I said earlier in the broadcast, has already confirmed over 600 convicted criminals in the Caravan, which also ought to give us pause. You may notice also that there was a woman being interviewed in that particular video who has a 15-year-old son who's special needs. And my heart goes out to her, and absolutely I understand why she would want to come to this country and make a better life. But that same woman, they actually did an interview with her. Epoch Times did an interview with her and her special needs son. And she said that Pueblo Cifuentes has a system where they organize all the people in the Caravan to go in groups that they send. So in other words, they assign you a number with groups of 10. And when they call your number, your group is supposed to go forward that day, and your group is supposed to go to the border to seek asylum that day. But the first day they did, where people were rushing the border, they called her number. And they also called the number of that woman whose picture we've seen 80,000 times all over cable news of her and her children running through diapers, which, by the way, she also gave an interview later, and magically her kids had pants in that picture. So seems a miracle to me that that thing looked so insanely staged for a number of reasons. You can look in the background and there's people that are just kind of idly standing around, which if there was tear gas really being shot over them, you'd think that they would, I don't know, move. And you've got two other reporters in the background with tripods and cameras shooting the whole thing. So, I mean, it's just incredibly staged looking. But nonetheless, who in their right mind actually goes up and uses women and children as human shields, which we have had multiple accounts of different news outlets saying that that is exactly what's happening, and border agents saying the same thing, that when they get to the front, the migrants are actually, these young men are pushing women and children to the front, hoping that that will result in them not using tear gas or not trying to deter them. They are using children as human shields. That's just so unconscionable to me. This woman was not doing that. But isn't it amazing that a woman with a 15-year-old special needs son just happened to be in the first group going up there? And you heard the political agenda of the group that is organizing this whole thing. They think that America is nothing, America is racist, and it should be torn down, and that they should be importing these people and we should have open borders. You heard them say that. And so now, isn't it an odd coincidence that a woman with a special needs son just happened to go up there and be there where they were, according to her, going to be doing a demonstration? That's her words coming from this interview. And that she was one of the ones that was called up to go and do that. And according to her, this is what she said. She said it's not voluntary because they tell you if you don't go with them that day, you are not going to get asylum status. I don't think it's a coincidence that a woman with a special needs son just happened to be there the first day, because believe me, they would have loved nothing more than to get the press of border agents tear gassing a special needs boy, even though they wouldn't have obviously been aiming for him. That's the headline that they were seeking. This whole thing is political theater. This whole thing is staged. These people are specifically manipulating and using these poor people, using them as pawns to push a political narrative. And it absolutely makes me sick, because I believe there are probably really good people in this caravan. I do. I believe there are probably good people that really do. They've just kind of been bamboozled. They really do want a better life for themselves, or some of them may actually be worried about something that's going on in their home country. But the point is, these groups that are being funded by guys like Beto O'Rourke and George Soros, they are specifically manipulating these people into doing what they want them to because it fits their political agenda. And that really drives me up a wall. Let's look at an excerpt from this particular interview that she did. But as we were with the caravan, we are forced to. The truth is that we were told that if you didn't go with the caravan, then we were not with them, and you know, since we departed from Honduras, we came with the caravan. So in other words, you do what we tell you to do, or you're out. They were forcing this woman with a special needs kid to go up there the first day with this demonstration that they were doing at the border where they rushed the border fence. She also said, this is later in the interview, what I did yesterday was very risky. This is after the Sunday where they rushed the border fence and the border agent shot tear gas. What we did yesterday was very risky. I wish it won't happen again, she said, and blamed the large number of male migrants who rushed past the Mexican riot police to storm the border. There are people here that only think about themselves. They don't think about the mothers with kids. They think about nothing. I mean, that's a story right out of the mouth of one of the migrants there. She's saying these people that are organizing the caravan, they don't care about us. They're just trying to get done whatever they need done. They're not thinking about this. They had us going up there with a bunch of young teenage boys, essentially. And so you've also got this, Arlen Cruz, who has a 2-year-old. She gave an interview to the same news outlet, the Epoch Times, on Monday. She said, I was told it would be peaceful, normal demonstration just to join in. But then everything went wrong. Nobody said we would cross. They just said it was a demonstration to the bridge and that we would come back. And clearly, that's not what they told other people. So you've got this complete lie that they're running, this racket that they're running to use these people as their political pawns, and it is just absolutely sickening. And what's really sad about this is that the media has a complete double standard when it comes to this. Because you're talking about the plight of refugees and not helping people. Well, you're looking at this group, and the vast majority of the group apparently are coming here for jobs, and they're not families and children. They're young, about military age men. Where was all this outrage for Asia Bibi? Seriously. You remember Asia Bibi, the Christian woman that is still fighting for her life and still hasn't gotten out of Pakistan and is still... There are mobs hunting for her, trying to kill her and her children, and have already attacked her legal team that are going after her because she committed the great sin of blaspheming Muhammad. And by the way, they still can't even prove that she did that. And yet, despite all this, there are mobs chasing after her, and she hasn't gotten asylum yet. Thankfully, Senator Rand Paul has brought her case up before the president, but so far, we haven't done anything about that. Where's the left's outrage about someone like her? What about Jews and Christians in the Middle East? What about Muslims that aren't Muslim enough in the Middle East? We're not hearing a lot of outrage about them right now. And so again, it is all about a political agenda. If you don't believe that there's a double standard, Obama's Border Patrol used more tear gas more often than the Trump Border Patrol. Now, granted, this was partly because his policies kind of encouraged a lot of people to come to the border, and so you had more people there. But look through this record with me. On November 27th, 2013, Obama's Border Patrol used pepper spray on migrants at the exact same border crossing. Same one where this border rush happened, he was using pepper spray, not tear gas, actual pepper spray on the migrants trying to cross the border then. And what was the news coverage like? If you're looking at the local news coverage, they were praising Border Patrol, talking about how peaceful it was and how the Border Patrol agents were able to deter them with doing so in a humane way. Complete double standard there. And between 2010 and 2012, Border Patrol reported 1,600 use of force incidents. 1,600. And the left is outraged about one that happened under Trump's watch, where nobody was hurt. Not only were there no deaths reported, there were not even any injuries reported. And so it is unconscionable to me that they have this massive double standard and still don't see it. You remember the outrage they had for the cages and the buses that had child, car seats in them and child separations. All of that happened under Obama. Most of it started under Obama. And yet they were complaining about it because Trump was in the White House. There is just a huge double standard here. And I'll end the whole thing like this. I feel for these folks. I really do. I genuinely have compassion for the people that are being used like this. And most of them are probably nice, good people that wouldn't want to hurt anybody. But their plight is not an excuse to break the law, especially when they're trying to seek asylum under false pretenses. And this is the thing that we have to be able to make a distinguishing characteristic on. There's a difference in legal and illegal immigration. I'm for legal immigration, and that includes asylum seekers that come to our border and ask for asylum the right way, come in the front door instead of trying to sneak around the side. Those people I don't have a lot of sympathy for. But we need to reform our immigration system to make it more robust, to make it easier to get in. But the point is, there still needs to be a legal process. And these guys that are trying to climb the fence and get in through underhanded ways, they're being used as political pawns. And they don't even realize it. And that makes me feel for them even more. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to the daily dose of stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
Okay, so today's daily dose of stupid, I had to mention this one just because of how ridiculous it is. Payless Shoes decided that they were going to punk customers in California. And for those of you who haven't been to Payless Shoes, it's just like the name implies. It's a low-count shoe place. It's kind of like the Walmart of shoes. So they sell good products, but they sell the cheap kinds. And so what they did was they bought out an old department store kind of thing. And they put all these fancy logos on it and branded it with a different name and didn't tell people it was Payless Shoes, and they stocked it with their own stuff. So in other words, they stocked it with the cheap shoes. And there were people that were paying $600 and $700 for a $20 pair of shoes. And it just goes to show you that there are some people that will pay more money for the same product because they're not actually doing their research. They're not actually looking into it. Now, Payless did the right thing and gave the money back to the people afterward. But what they were doing is when they revealed to these people that actually this was a Payless and those were Payless shoes and they were actually $20, it was amazing to see some of their reactions, and they're going to use that in future ad campaigns, which I really like. I think that's really funny. So good job, Payless, on doing this. And I'll be honest, they might have gotten me on something like that. Now, they wouldn't have got me on shoes because I'm not paying any more than about $50 for a pair of shoes. Maybe an exception for that would be cowboy boots, but that's because I can wear them for like 3 or 4 years. But when it comes to shoes, I do think it's hilarious the way they were able to trick these people, but they gave the money back. They did it the right way, and they're going to use the reactions as an ad for the future. So I really do like the fact that they were able to pull this off. That was just customers acting stupidly and being kind of loose with their money, which reminds me of a Bible proverb. Reminds me of a proverb that's not in the Bible: a fool and his money are soon parted. And this is just one more example of it. Speaking of the Bible, though, we're going to go ahead and go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today comes from the book of Ruth, and you may remember We were reading a little bit about Ruth the last time we met on the Chaplain's Report and talking about how Ruth's husband was an Israelite and his mother, of course, was an Israelite as well. And he had died. And Ruth, despite being a Moabitess, despite being somebody from a far off country, she says, no, I'm going to remain loyal to my mother-in-law. I'm going to take care of her. And then we are going to go forward and we are going to go and live in Israel since my husband has died and her other son, unfortunately, had died as well. And so they leave Moab and they go back to Israel. And Ruth says this, and this is sort of a speech that Naomi gives when they've returned to Israel. They've come back to Bethlehem. And this one comes from Ruth chapter 1. And we'll look at verse 19. It's actually right where we left off last time, verses 19 through 21. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem, and when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, Is this Naomi? And she said to them, Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. What do you call me, Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? It's pretty clear when you're reading this verse that there is a certain sense of neglect, there's a certain sense of abandonment that Naomi feels even towards God. So much so that she has lost her identity to a degree. She says, I don't even want to be referred to as Naomi because when I go back home, I don't want people to be like, oh, look, Naomi had this great life and she went to live off in Moab and now she's coming back and both of her sons are gone and the only person left in the world is Ruth. So Naomi's a little bitter about this. She doesn't necessarily have the best attitude. But Naomi does feel defeated and sort of neglected by God. And to a degree, I'm not saying that this makes it right, but it's understandable. It is understandable that she is a little bit upset because she's just lost both of her sons. And you have to remember that back in the day, widows and people without either a son or a husband or something to take care of them, it was very, very difficult for a woman to make it because she couldn't do as much physical labor as a man. And back then the economy was primarily predicated upon how much physical labor you could do. And so because of that, Naomi is in a tough spot right now. And we'll see here in just a second that when she returns to Israel, her plan, at least for the immediate future, is to glean. Gleaning is a process by which the Israelites would leave a portion of their fields for the less fortunate. So basically she's saying, I left, I had this great life, I was going with my sons who had just met these women and had married them, and now I'm coming back and both of my sons are gone, my husband's gone, and now I have to beg for my food. So Naomi has lost just about everything except Ruth. And so it's understandable that she feels a little defeated. We all get like this. Even those of us that are very strong in the faith, bad things happen to us, and sometimes we just feel like, almost like God has neglected us. Like God's not really taking care of us. We see this all the time in the prophets. If you'll look back at some of the language that she uses here, it is really powerful. If you'll look at that, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I mean, she is upset at God. She really is. And that's a bad place to be, but even some of God's most faithful felt like this from time to time. You can look at, for example, Elijah, who was so distraught that he asked God to take his life. And so, even after we do things, even when we feel like we're doing the right thing and trying to obey God, sometimes life kicks you in the teeth. And you do feel this sense of abandonment. But imagine how poor she would feel without Ruth. Because remember, Ruth is pretty much the only thing left in her life now. Her daughter-in-law. And so God has provided her with the only thing that she's going to need. I mean, yeah, pretty much all she's got left in this world is Ruth. And what we'll see later on in this book is that that was enough. And that's the thing. Sometimes God allows things to be taken away from us, allows blessings to no longer be a part of our lives. But at no point does he ever leave us ill-equipped to do his will. He doesn't give us everything that we want, but he always gives us enough. He always gives us enough. And that is something that we have to keep in mind. We may not even have enough to physically sustain ourselves, but we always have enough to spiritually sustain ourselves and to do what is right. That is something that is consistent throughout all of God's Word. Because God has an amazing talent for bringing good out of even the worst situations. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago about this exact subject. About how sometimes life just kicks you down and horrible things happen. And one of the things that I talked to him about is, when I was going through cancer, I felt like this for a little while. And I thought, as horrible as it is that I didn't have insurance, I didn't have any way to provide for myself, I didn't have a way to take care of myself from a medical perspective, God gave me everything I needed. He gave me a great nurse. He gave me a great doctor. He gave me people at Baptist that cared about me enough to let me know about programs. He gave me a surgeon that was willing to take half cost, basically do it not at a loss, but certainly to where he wasn't making any money off of the surgery, because he knew my financial situation, Dr. Buddha down in Montgomery. He was willing to do that, basically not making any money off of it, just doing it at cost because he knew my financial situation. And so he had that and all these people from churches. Money just started pouring in from all across the country. There was so much that was given to me. God didn't give me everything I wanted, but he gave me enough, and that's the point. And that's the point that Naomi is going to see here very soon in this narrative. That just having her daughter-in-law with her, that was enough to provide for her. And you look at different stories throughout the Bible. You look at Joseph, who was sold into slavery and then rose to the top and then got kicked back down again and went into prison for a crime he didn't commit, and then raised back up and became the number 2 man in the most powerful country on earth. You look at Moses. I mean, Moses should have died as a baby. And yet, despite that horrible situation where there was a genocide of children, Moses was able to emerge from that. Moses, the man who God used to bring the children of Israel out of slavery. And Moses had several downs in his life as well. I mean, we could go on and on about this. You can look at Paul, who had so many setbacks in his ministry and kept pushing forward and kept doing the right thing, and eventually God did bless him for that. Or, and this is the main one, we remember Jesus. The greatest good that has ever come in the universe was God giving his only son. And how did he do it? Through a terrible situation. The sacrifice and the brutal murder of the only perfect man. And so, yes, sometimes life gives you stuff you don't want to deal with. But God has just an amazing talent for bringing wonderful, amazing, beautiful things to come out of even the worst situations. And if he did it through his son, if he did it through the death of the only innocent man that has ever lived, he can certainly bring good out of the terrible things that come to us in our life. And I want you to remember that Naomi is about to be blessed through Ruth. Naomi is going to be somebody who is remembered for all of time. We're thousands of years after her life, and we're still talking about her today. That's how important Naomi is. And Ruth is about to be a part of the lineage of King David. And long term, if we're looking a little further into the future, that means by extension, she is also a part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, the greatest blessing that has ever come to mankind. So just remember that when you're going through terrible situations in your own life, that sometimes God brings the best parts of us, the best things to us, the best blessings that we could ever imagine, things that we can't even imagine in our lifetime, through the worst situations and the worst scenarios that come to us in our life. And when you remember that, it does give you a feeling of invincibility. That no matter how bad things get, as long as God is there and he is willing to bless us, then no matter what comes our way, he will bring something wonderful out of it. Stay the course, friends.